The news hit Amherstburg, Ontario like a thunderbolt. In a town where everyone knows each other, word travels fast, but nothing could have prepared residents for the scale of the shock that rippled through the community that morning. In September 2025, Diageo, the multinational beverage giant and proud owner of Crown Royal, announced it would close its Amherstburg bottling plant by February 2026. The statement was brief, but its implications were enormous. For decades, this plant had been a cornerstone of the local economy, and the news sent shockwaves through every household, business, and gathering place in town. This plant wasn't just a workplace, it was a community pillar, employing generations and bottling a Canadian icon. Fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters had all walked through its doors, sharing stories and building lives around the steady hum of production lines. The plant's history was interwoven with the town's own, its legacy stretching back to the days when Crown Royal first became a household name. The decision felt abrupt, a corporate move that ignored decades of loyalty and history. Many workers learned of the closure not from their managers, but from news alerts on their phones. The sense of betrayal was palpable, as if the heart of Amherstburg had been ripped out with a single press release. For many, this was more than a business closure, it was a blow to Canadian pride. Crown Royal isn't just a whiskey, it's a symbol of national achievement, a product that Canadians have celebrated at weddings, holidays, and milestones for generations. The thought of losing that connection stung deeply. Crown Royal is woven into the national identity, its story synonymous with quality and craftsmanship. Each bottle tells a story of Canadian ingenuity, of hands that carefully crafted a spirit recognized around the world. The plant's closure threatened to sever that story, leaving a void in the fabric of Canadian culture. The idea of moving production to the US struck a nerve, fueling fears about the erosion of Canadian manufacturing. People worried about what would happen to the town's identity and whether other iconic brands might follow suit, leaving communities across the country vulnerable to similar fates. The closure meant the loss of up to 200 union jobs, a devastating hit for a town of just over 20,000. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were families, friends, and neighbors whose livelihoods were suddenly at risk. The ripple effects threatened local businesses, schools, and the very spirit of Amherstburg. Outrage quickly spread beyond Amherstburg, turning the closure into a national flashpoint about economic sovereignty and the future of Canadian industry. Politicians, union leaders, and everyday Canadians voiced their anger, demanding answers and action. The debate reached Parliament, sparking conversations about what it means to protect Canadian jobs in a globalized world. The stage was set for a showdown, a small Ontario town versus a global corporate giant. As the community rallied together, the world watched to see if Amherstburg's spirit could overcome the forces of globalization, and whether the legacy of Crown Royal would remain truly Canadian. The political response was immediate and fierce, sending shockwaves through Ontario and beyond. As news of Diageo's decision spread, it ignited a firestorm of outrage among politicians, workers, and everyday citizens alike. At the forefront of this uproar was Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who wasted no time in making his stance crystal clear. In a dramatic and highly publicized gesture, Ford appeared on live television, unscrewed a bottle of Crown Royal, and poured it out for all to see. The act was more than symbolic. It was a bold statement of Ontario's anger and frustration, a visual protest that captured the attention of the entire country. Ford didn't hold back. He launched a scathing attack on Diageo's leadership, accusing them of putting profits over people and betraying the very workers who helped build the Crown Royal brand. His words echoed the sentiments of thousands who felt abandoned by a company they once trusted. Taking things a step further, Ford threatened to pull Crown Royal from LCBO shelves, a move that would not only send a strong message, but also threaten to devastate Diageo's sales in Canada's largest and most lucrative province. This was no empty threat, or mere political theater. It was a high-stakes economic warning, signaling that Ontario was prepared to use its considerable market power to defend its workers and its heritage. The message was clear and unmistakable. If Diageo heard Ontario, Ontario would not hesitate to hit back, using every tool at its disposal. Ford's protest struck a chord across the province. Communities rallied together, with workers in Amherstburg and beyond, feeling a renewed sense of hope and solidarity. Union leaders, local businesses, and families all joined the chorus of support, determined to stand up for their neighbors and their livelihoods. The groundswell of support quickly reached Ottawa, where federal politicians from multiple parties pledged to raise the issue in Parliament. The fight for Crown Royal became a national conversation, uniting Canadians from coast to coast. Ford's actions reframed the entire story, turning it into a battle for Canadian loyalty and pride in the face of what many saw as corporate abandonment. The debate was no longer just about a single factory, it was about the values that define Canada. For many, Ford's fiery protest was a powerful sign that the community wasn't alone in its struggle. It showed that leaders were willing to fight for ordinary people, and that the spirit of Ontario was alive and unbreakable. The battle for Crown Royal's Canadian soul had begun, and it was clear that this was only the opening salvo in a much larger fight for the heart of a nation. Under fire from both the public and the media, Diageo found itself in the hot seat, forced to justify a controversial move that had sparked outrage across Canada and concern among whiskey lovers everywhere. The company's leadership stepped forward, defending their decision not as a slight against tradition or national pride, but as a calculated business maneuver. They framed the shift as a matter of business efficiency, emphasizing the need to adapt in a rapidly changing global market. Executives pointed to the importance of streamlining operations and making tough choices to ensure the company's long-term survival. Diageo cited the high costs and logistical headaches of shipping empty bottles into Canada, only to send finished whiskey back across the border to the United States, by far its largest and most lucrative market. The process, they argued, was inefficient and unsustainable in the face of mounting economic pressures. By moving bottling operations south of the border, Diageo claimed it could streamline logistics, reduce transportation costs, and ultimately deliver Crown Royal to American consumers more quickly and reliably. The company insisted this was a strategic move, not a reflection on the quality or heritage of Canadian whiskey. Diageo's spokesperson reiterated that this was a necessary step to stay competitive in a challenging industry landscape, and not an attempt to diminish Canada's role in Crown Royal's legacy. They assured stakeholders that the brand's Canadian roots would remain intact. The reality, they explained, was that U.S. demand for Crown Royal had reached unprecedented levels, making the old cross-border shuffle increasingly impractical. With American shelves needing constant restocking, efficiency was no longer just a goal, it was a necessity. Industry experts weighed in, noting that Diageo's move was part of a broader trend among global spirits companies. With whiskey sales declining in some markets and costs rising everywhere, many producers were being forced to make difficult decisions to protect their bottom lines. The Amherstburg plant, with its aging infrastructure and persistent logistical challenges, became an obvious target for cost-cutting. For Diageo, the numbers simply didn't add up anymore. Still, Diageo was quick to stress that Crown Royal would remain, at its core, a Canadian whiskey, mashed, distilled, and aged on Canadian soil, preserving the craftsmanship and tradition that made it famous. Only the final bottling for the U.S. market would move, they said, hoping to calm critics and reassure loyal fans that the spirit of Crown Royal would not be lost in the transition. But for many Canadians, especially workers and local communities, the distinction rang hollow. The move felt like a loss, not just of jobs, but of a piece of national identity. Crown Royal isn't just a drink, it's a piece of Canadian history. Created in 1939 to honor a royal visit, it blended 50 whiskeys and came in a regal purple bag. Its ingredients, prairie grains and Lake Winnipeg water, are pure Canada. The brand became a national treasure, its purple bag a cultural icon. After conquering the U.S. market in the 1960s, Crown Royal became a source of Canadian pride. Diageo's 2001 acquisition brought global success but also distance from its roots. The Amherstburg closure felt like the final break, a sign that profit now trumped heritage. For many, it was a painful reminder that a Canadian icon was controlled from afar. Diageo tried to reassure Canadians Crown Royal would still be made in Canada. By law, Canadian whiskey must be mashed, distilled, and aged in Canada for at least 3 years. The Gimli, Manitoba Distillery, and Valleyfield, Quebec warehouses would continue these core processes. Only the final bottling and packaging for the U.S. market would move south. Bottling for Canada and other markets would shift to Valleyfield. But for Amherstburg workers, this technicality was cold comfort. Their role in the final product was vital, and its loss felt like a racing part of the brand's story. The move split the whiskey's journey, born and aged in Canada, but dressed for export in the U.S. For Amherstburg's workers, the closure was a personal crisis. Many had spent their careers at the plant, some following family tradition. The specialized skills and good wages would be hard to replace locally. The union Unifor condemned Diageo's decision and launched a campaign to save the plant. Local leaders, including Mayor Michael Proulx, worked to pressure Diageo and find a new buyer. Hopes rested on repurposing the facility or attracting another company. Yet, the odds were long. Corporate decisions like this are rarely reversed. Still, the community refused to give up, determined to fight for their future. The Crown Royal saga unfolded amid a tense Canada-US trade war. Canadian provinces were already boycotting American spirits in response to U.S. tariffs. The closure was seen as tone-deaf, a Canadian brand moving jobs south during a trade standoff. The move stoked fears about the future of Canadian manufacturing, especially in Ontario's auto sector. If Crown Royal could leave, what was safe? The story became a symbol of Canada's vulnerability in a globalized economy. Politicians seized on these anxieties, warning of more closures to come. The controversy raised urgent questions about how Canada could protect its industries and jobs. Diageo's cost-cutting may have saved money, but it risked Crown Royal's most valuable asset, its Canadian identity. The backlash, amplified by Ford's protest, put the brand's reputation in jeopardy. For decades, Crown Royal sold a story of Canadian pride and craftsmanship. Moving bottling to the U.S. shattered that narrative for many. The threat of an LCBO boycott loomed, and competitors circled. The iconic purple bag now risked symbolizing broken promises. Diageo faced a classic dilemma: efficiency versus brand loyalty. The long-term damage to Crown Royal's image was uncertain. Would Canadians forgive, or would they turn away from a brand they once called their own? As the dust settles, uncertainty hangs over Amherstburg and Crown Royal. Workers and local leaders fight on, hoping for a reversal or a new buyer for the plant. The facility's fate will shape the town's economic future. For Crown Royal, the challenge is to repair its reputation and reassure Canadians of its roots. The threat of LCBO delisting remains, and regaining trust will be costly and slow. The controversy is a cautionary tale about the clash between corporate efficiency and community loyalty. The outcome will be watched closely as a test of protest, resilience, and the power of a brand to recover from self-inflicted wounds. The final chapter is still unwritten.